The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the vast space. Jake Morrison walked inside alone, his footsteps barely making any noise on the polished metal floor. Around him, hundreds of alien beings sat in curved rows that reached up toward the ceiling like a giant bowl. The air smelled strange, like metal mixed with something sweet that made his nose itch. Jake looked small compared to the creatures around him. To his left sat the Thraxians, giant bug-like beings with sharp claws and black eyes that never seemed to blink. Their leader clicked his mouthparts together in what Jake knew was their version of laughter. Behind them were the Zephyrites, looking like walking crystals that caught the light and threw rainbow colors across the walls. The Kaldorians filled an entire section with their massive bodies, each one standing over 8 feet tall with thick arms and faces that looked like they were carved from stone. The human table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by all these alien species. Jake pulled out his chair and sat down, placing a small recording device on the table in front of him. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching him, studying him like he was some kind of interesting bug they had found. Council leader Vexitar stood up from his position at the front of the room. He was one of the reptilian Sarathi, with green scales that seemed to shine under the lights and yellow eyes that looked like they belonged to a snake. When he spoke, his voice carried easily through the chamber thanks to the special sound system built into the walls. "We gather today to deliver the final terms to the species known as humans," Vexitar said, his long tongue flicking out to taste the air. "After much discussion among the member species of this council, we have reached a decision about Earth and its colonies." Jake sat quietly and listened. He had expected this moment for months. The Galactic Council had been making threats against Earth ever since human ships had started exploring beyond their home system. They said humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be allowed to expand freely through space. Vexitar picked up a metal tablet and began reading from it. "The species of Earth will have 30 standard days to comply with the following demands. First, all human military vessels must be surrendered to Council forces. Second, all human colonies beyond the Earth system must be evacuated and turned over to Council administration. Third, Earth itself will accept a Council governor who will oversee all human activities." The alien leader paused and looked directly at Jake. "Fourth, humans will provide tribute to the Council in the form of raw materials, manufactured goods, and labor. The amount of this tribute will be determined by the Council and may be changed at any time. Fifth, no human may leave the Earth system without Council permission." Murmurs of approval came from around the chamber. The Kaldorian war chief, a massive creature with scars covering his arms, stood up and spoke in a voice like grinding rocks. "My warriors look forward to hunting humans for sport," he said. "We have heard they break easily." The Thraxian hive leader made those clicking sounds again. "Our hive worlds need new workers. Humans will learn to serve the collective, or they will be recycled into nutrients for our young." Other species added their own comments. The Voidwalkers, mysterious beings in dark robes, said nothing but their presence alone was meant to be threatening. The Mineralians, usually peaceful rock-like creatures, had been forced to support the ultimatum by their more aggressive allies. Jake listened to it all without changing his expression. He had trained for this moment, learning to control his reactions and hide his emotions. The aliens needed to believe that humans were weak and scared, that they would give up without a fight. When the comments died down, Vexitar continued reading. "These terms are not negotiable. The Council has the support of over 300 warships currently surrounding your home system. Resistance would be pointless and would result in the complete destruction of your species." The reptilian leader set down his tablet and stared at Jake. "Human representative, you will now respond to these terms on behalf of your species." Jake stood up slowly. The chamber fell completely silent except for the quiet hum of the air recycling systems. He could feel the weight of all those alien eyes on him, waiting to see him beg for mercy or break down in fear. Instead, Jake's voice came out calm and steady. "I thank the Council for making their position clear," he said. "However, I cannot give you an answer right now. I need to return to Earth and discuss these terms with my government." A wave of surprised sounds came from the aliens. They had expected him to surrender immediately, or at least try to negotiate for better terms. The idea that humans might actually need time to think about it seemed to confuse them. Vexitar's yellow eyes narrowed. You have 30 days, human. Not 1 day more. If we do not receive your complete surrender by then, our fleets will turn your world into ash. Jake nodded politely. Understood. My government will give you our answer in exactly 30 days. He picked up his recording device and walked toward the door. Behind him, the aliens began talking among themselves in dozens of different languages. He caught fragments of their conversations through his translation device. They were already discussing how to divide up Earth's resources and what to do with the human population. The Kaldorians were making plans for hunting preserves on human worlds. The Thraxians talked about which humans would make the best workers and which should be turned into food. The Zephyrite discussed mining operations they wanted to set up on Earth's moon. Jake kept walking until he reached his shuttle in the docking bay. The pilot, a young woman named Carol Davis, looked at him with worried eyes as he climbed aboard. "How did it go, sir?" she asked. Jake waited until they were safely away from the station before answering. He pulled out a small communication device and entered a long code. After a few seconds, a green light appeared on the screen. "Mission accomplished," he said into the device. They bought it completely. Authorization code 77 Alpha. Operation Iron Curtain is approved. He turned to Carol and smiled for the first time in weeks. "Tell the crew to set course for Earth and send a message ahead to Admiral Carter. Tell him it's time to show these aliens what humanity really looks like when someone threatens our home." As their shuttle jumped into hyperspace, Jake looked back one last time at the council station. In 30 days, those same aliens who had just threatened to destroy humanity would learn that they had made the biggest mistake in galactic history. 28 days had passed since Jake Morrison left the Galactic Council chambers, and the alien species were growing more confident with each hour. Admiral Lisa Kane stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Destroyer of Worlds, watching the sensor displays that showed Earth's solar system spread out before her fleet. The view looked exactly as she had expected. 300 Council warships surrounded the human home system in a perfect blockade formation. No ship could enter or leave without her permission. Earth itself appeared helpless, a small blue and green world that seemed to have accepted its fate. Lisa was a Kaldorian, one of the warrior race that had conquered dozens of worlds for the Council. Her thick arms were covered in ritual scars that marked each of her victories in battle. She had led the attacks on 7 different species, and all of them had either surrendered quickly or been destroyed completely. Humans would be no different. Her second-in-command, an insect-like Thraxian named Clact, approached her with the latest intelligence reports. His 4 arms held different data tablets while his compound eyes reflected the light from the screen displays. "Admiral, our scouts report normal civilian traffic around Earth," Clact said in his clicking voice. "Cargo ships moving between their moon bases and orbital stations. Mining vessels traveling to their asteroid belt operations. Nothing that suggests military preparation." Lisa nodded with satisfaction. "What about their communication networks?" "Still broadcasting entertainment programs and news reports," Clact replied. "Our translation computers have been monitoring their networks. They appear to be discussing sports competitions and weather patterns. No mention of military mobilization or evacuation plans. On the main screen, they could see human ships going about their daily business. Small cargo vessels carried supplies between Earth and its colonies. Passenger ships transported civilians from one station to another. Mining ships moved slowly toward the asteroid fields that surrounded the outer planets. Lisa had seen this pattern before. When a species realized they could not win against the Council, they often pretended that everything was normal while secretly hoping for some miracle to save them. The humans were following the same predictable path as all the others. "Have we detected any attempt to hide military vessels?" Lisa asked. Clack checked another tablet. "Our sensors show approximately 50 human military ships in the entire system. Most appear to be patrol vessels or cargo escorts, nothing larger than a light cruiser. Their technology appears to be at least 2 generations behind our own." Lisa smiled, showing her sharp teeth. In her experience, primitive species always made the same mistakes. They built ships that looked impressive to them, but were completely outmatched by Council technology. They relied on energy weapons that could barely scratch Council armor. They used tactics that had been outdated for centuries. Meanwhile, on the Kaldorian homeworld of Drakmor, War Chief Drex was already making plans for his victory celebration. He stood in his war room studying maps of human colonies and marking which ones his warriors would claim as prizes. Drex was even larger than Admiral Lisa, with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Ritual tattoos covered his chest, each one representing an enemy he had personally killed in combat. Soon he would add human symbols to that collection. "My lord," said his aide, a younger Kaldorian named Grok. "The human colonies appear to be poorly defended. Our intelligence suggests they have fewer than 10,000 soldiers spread across all their settlements." Drex laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. 10,000? My personal guard has more warriors than that. We will sweep through their worlds like a storm through dry grass. He pointed to the largest human colony world on his map. This one will become my personal hunting preserve. I want the humans kept alive so my warriors can practice their skills. Make sure the council knows that Drakmor claims this world as payment for our service. On the other side of the galaxy, in the crystal cities of the Zephyrite homeworld, Queen Shimara was making her own plans. The crystal being sat in her throne room, her body reflecting and amplifying the light from dozens of energy sources around her. Unlike the brutal Kaldorians, the Zephyrites were more interested in Earth's resources than its people. Their scouts had identified rich mineral deposits on human worlds, especially rare crystals that could be used to build new cities for their growing population. "The human mining operations are surprisingly efficient," reported her chief scientist. "A smaller crystal being named Resonance, they have extracted significant quantities of rare elements from their asteroid fields. Once we control their territory, we can expand these operations considerably." Queen Shimara pulsed with satisfaction, her crystalline body glowing brighter. "Have they shown any signs of resistance preparation?" "None whatsoever," Resonance replied. "Their mining ships continue normal operations. Their cargo vessels follow predictable routes. They appear to have accepted their situation. But the most confident of all the council species were the Thraxians. In their vast hive complexes, millions of insect-like beings worked together with perfect coordination. Queen Zak, the massive mother of the entire species, sat in her breeding chamber surrounded by thousands of her offspring. The Thraxians had been watching human biological data for months. They knew exactly how many humans lived on each world, what they ate, how fast they reproduced, and how much work they could perform. In the Thraxian mind, humans were simply another resource to be harvested and used. "The human workforce will integrate well into our operations," reported her chief analyzer, a specialized Thraxian bred specifically for studying other species. "Their physical capabilities match our requirements for manual labor. Their intelligence levels suggest they can be trained for complex tasks." Queen Zak made the clicking sound that indicated pleasure. "How many new workers will we gain?" "Approximately 12 billion humans across all their worlds," the analyzer replied. "Enough to increase our production capacity by 30%. Back in the human system, Admiral Lisa received regular reports from her scouts. Every day brought the same news. Human ships continued their normal routines. Human communication networks showed no signs of panic or preparation. Human colonies appeared to be completely unprepared for invasion. With only 2 days remaining until the deadline, Lisa was so confident that she began planning the victory ceremony. She would personally accept Earth's surrender in the same council chambers where Jake Morrison had received the ultimatum. The other council species would watch as humanity joined the long list of conquered civilizations. But if Lisa had looked more carefully at her sensor data, she might have noticed some small details that her computers dismissed as unimportant. The cargo ships that moved between human worlds were making slightly more trips than usual. The mining vessels were spending longer periods in the asteroid fields. The civilian passenger ships were carrying more people than their records indicated. Most importantly, she might have wondered why human entertainment broadcasts continued to run on schedule, why their news reports seemed so calm, and why no human leader had made any public statement about the approaching deadline. If Admiral Lisa had been more suspicious, she might have realized that everything about human behavior was just a little too normal. A little too calm, a little too perfect for a species facing complete destruction in 48 hours. The council chambers had never been so crowded. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy filled the curved rows of seats, while others watched from viewing galleries that had been hastily added to accommodate the massive audience. Even species that rarely left their homeworlds had sent observers to witness what they believed would be humanity's final humiliation. Jake Morrison walked through the same massive doors he had entered 30 days earlier, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. The aliens no longer watched him with simple curiosity. Now their eyes held the satisfied look of predators who had cornered their prey. Conversations buzzed throughout the chamber in dozens of different languages, all focused on the same topic: how to divide up humanity's possessions. The Kaldorians had brought their full war council, 20 of their largest warriors who sat in the front rows like judges waiting to pass sentence. War Chief Drex wore his ceremonial armor, polished to shine under the chamber lights. Each piece was decorated with symbols representing the species he had conquered for the council. Behind them sat the Thraxian delegation, their insect bodies clicking and buzzing as they communicated through chemical signals that human noses could barely detect. They had brought data tablets filled with detailed plans for processing human populations into useful workers for their hive worlds. The crystalline Zephyrite sparkled in their section, their bodies pulsing with different colors that indicated their emotional states. Today, those colors showed satisfaction and greed as they anticipated gaining access to Earth's mineral wealth. Even the mysterious Voidwalkers had increased their presence. Normally, only 1 or 2 of the shadowy beings attended council sessions, but today nearly a dozen sat in the highest gallery. Their dark robes made them almost invisible against the chamber walls, but their presence was felt by everyone in the room. Jake took his seat at the human table, placing the same small recording device he had used 30 days earlier on the surface in front of him. The device looked harmless enough, but several alien security officers watched it carefully with their various types of sensors. Council leader Vextar rose from his position at the front of the chamber. The reptilian being wore his most elaborate robes, decorated with precious metals and gems from 100 different worlds. This was a moment he had been planning for months, and he intended to make it memorable. "We gathered today to receive the final answer from the species known as humans," Vextar announced, his voice carrying easily throughout the chamber. 30 days ago, this council presented clear terms for Earth's surrender. Today we will hear their response. The chamber fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems. Hundreds of alien eyes focused on Jake Morrison, waiting to see him break down or beg for mercy. Instead, Jake stood up calmly and activated his recording device. A holographic display appeared above the table, showing what looked like a tactical map of the local galaxy. Points of light indicated the positions of various fleets and installations. "Before I give you our answer," Jake said, his voice steady and clear, "I would like to share some information about humanity that your intelligence services seem to have overlooked." A murmur of confusion ran through the chamber. This was not the response the aliens had expected. They had prepared for tears, pleading, or angry defiance. They had not prepared for a calm presentation with visual aids. The holographic display zoomed in on the area around Earth, showing the Council fleet in perfect detail. 300 warships surrounded the human home system in a blockade formation that looked completely overwhelming. Red symbols marked each alien vessel, while blue symbols showed the handful of human ships that had been detected. "Your fleet positions are certainly impressive," Jake continued. "Admiral Kane has done an excellent job positioning her forces for maximum intimidation effect." More confused murmurs came from the audience. Several council members leaned forward in their seats, trying to understand where this strange human confidence was coming from. Jake touched a control on his device, and the display changed. Now it showed a much wider view of local space, extending far beyond Earth's solar system. New symbols began appearing on the map, first dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. "However," Jake said, "your intelligence networks missed a few things about human space operations." The display now showed the true extent of human presence in the galaxy. What the Council had believed to be a single star system with a few small colonies was revealed as a vast network of hidden installations spanning dozens of star systems. Stealth technology had concealed massive shipyards, research facilities, and military bases. Admiral Lisa Kane, watching from her flagship, felt her confidence begin to crack as she saw the display. Her own sensors were confirming what the human was showing them. Ships were appearing on her screens that had been completely invisible moments before. Installations that her scouts had dismissed as empty space were revealing themselves as heavily armed platforms. The hologram continued to expand, showing human ships emerging from sensor shadows around every major Council world. Mining vessels that had been dismissed as harmless civilian traffic were transforming before their eyes, revealing weapon systems and military equipment. Cargo ships were dropping their outer hulls to expose warship configurations underneath. War Chief Drex stood up in his section, his massive frame trembling with rage. "Impossible," he roared. "Our sensors would have detected such forces." Jake smiled politely and touched another control. The display zoomed in on Drakmor, the Kaldorian homeworld. Red dots appeared around the planet, each one representing a human ship that had been hiding in the system for weeks. "Actually, Chief Drex, human ships have been visiting your world regularly for the past 2 years," Jake said. "We have detailed maps of your military installations, your population centers, and your planetary defenses. We also know about your personal collection of hunting trophies from conquered species." The chamber erupted in shocked voices as species after species saw similar revelations about their own worlds. The Thraxian hive worlds were surrounded by human vessels. Zephyrid crystal cities had human observation posts hidden among their asteroid fields. Even the secretive Voidwalker territories showed signs of human infiltration. But the most shocking revelation came when Jake activated the final display mode. The hologram now showed real-time numbers, ship counts, weapon loadouts, and strategic positions. Where the Council had expected to face perhaps 50 outdated human vessels, they now saw evidence of over 2,000 ships equipped with technology they had never encountered before. "The numbers are quite different from what your intelligence services reported," Jake observed calmly. "But then again, humans have always been good at hiding in plain sight." Queen Shamara of the Zephyrite pulsed with alarm colors, her crystalline body flickering between red and orange. "How is this possible? Our sensors are the most advanced in the galaxy." Jake's expression remained friendly, but his words carried an edge that made even the largest Kaldorian warriors shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Your sensors are designed to detect the kinds of technology that Council species use. They were never designed to find humans who didn't want to be found." Council leader Vexitar finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a hiss than his usual commanding tone. "What is the meaning of this display, human? Are you trying to negotiate new terms?" Jake Morrison looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. When he spoke again, his voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. "No, Council Leader Vextar, we are not here to negotiate. We are here to give you our final answer to your ultimatum." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Our answer is no. We decline your terms. We reject your authority, and we place the Galactic Council under arrest for crimes against sentient species." The silence in the council chambers lasted exactly 3 seconds before chaos erupted. War Chief Drex leaped to his feet, his massive fist slamming down on the armrest of his chair hard enough to crack the metal. Queen Shamara's crystalline body flashed angry red colors that painted the walls around her. The Thraxian delegation began clicking and buzzing so loudly that their chemical communication signals made several other species cough and gag. Council leader Vextar pointed one clawed finger at Jake Morrison, his yellow eyes blazing with fury. "You dare threaten this council? Your pathetic species will be wiped from existence for this insult." But before Jake could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red and white while automated voices announced in a dozen different languages that unauthorized ships had been detected, approaching Nexus Prime. Admiral Lisa Kane was already moving toward the exit when her communication device crackled to life. The voice of her bridge commander came through, high-pitched with panic. "Admiral, we have multiple contacts appearing on sensors. Human ships, hundreds of them, materializing out of hyperspace at close range." Lisa ran through the corridors of the station, pushing aside smaller aliens as she raced toward the docking bay where her shuttle waited. Behind her, she could hear other military officers shouting orders into their communication devices, trying to coordinate a defense against an attack that had already begun. On her flagship, Captain Ryan Hughes led a strike force of 30 human vessels that had emerged from hyperspace, less than 5 kilometers from the Council's most powerful warship. The distance was impossibly close for a hyperspace jump, requiring precision that most species considered suicidal. But human pilots had been practicing these maneuvers for years, using computer calculations that took into account gravitational fields, spatial distortions, and hyperspace currents that alien navigators had never learned to measure. "Target their command centers and weapon systems," Ryan ordered his weapons officers. "Remember, we want to disable, not destroy. We need their crews alive for questioning." The human ships opened fire with weapons that made no sense to the alien defenders. Instead of energy beams or plasma bolts, they used kinetic projectiles that moved at incredible speeds. The Council ships had shields designed to deflect energy weapons, but these solid metal rounds punched through the defensive barriers like they were made of paper. But even stranger than the weapons were their effects. When the human rounds hit their targets, the alien crews inside the ship simply collapsed. Their ships remained intact and functional, but everyone aboard fell unconscious as neural disruptor fields flooded their vessels. It was a type of weapon that most galactic species had never imagined, designed to neutralize enemies without destroying valuable equipment. The Pride of Vextar, the Council's flagship and most powerful vessel, lasted exactly 4 minutes against the human attack. Its massive energy cannon never even had a chance to fire. Human ships surrounded it from all directions, hitting it with dozens of neural disruptor rounds until its entire crew of 3,000 aliens lay unconscious at their stations. Admiral Lisa Kane reached her shuttle just as the station shook from multiple impacts. Through the docking bay windows, she could see human ships swarming around the Council fleet like angry insects. Explosions lit up the darkness as alien vessels tried desperately to fight back against attackers they could barely detect on their sensors. "Get us out of here," she shouted at her pilot as soon as she was aboard. But when the shuttle tried to leave the docking bay, they found their path blocked by a human destroyer that appeared directly in front of them. The human ship was smaller than most Council vessels, but its weapons were already trained on Lisa's shuttle. A voice came over the communication system, speaking in perfect Kaldorian language. "Admiral Kane, this is Captain Carol Davis of the Earth Defense Force. You are ordered to return to the station and surrender yourself and your crew for processing." Lisa's pilot looked at her with terrified eyes. Like all Kaldorians, he had been raised to believe that their warriors were the finest in the galaxy. The idea of surrendering to humans, a species they had dismissed as primitive, was almost impossible to accept. "Fire on them," Lisa ordered through gritted teeth. Her pilot triggered the shuttle's weapons, sending energy bolts toward the human ship, but the rounds simply disappeared into what looked like empty space around the human vessel. Some kind of shielding system was absorbing their attacks without any visible effect. "Admiral Kane, that was not a request," Captain Davis said again. "Return to the station now, or we will disable your shuttle and bring you back ourselves." Before Lisa could respond, her shuttle's engines simply stopped working. All the control systems went dark except for basic life support. Through the windows, she could see small human devices attached to her shuttle's hull, apparently some kind of sophisticated hacking technology that could take control of alien systems. Similar scenes were playing out throughout the Council fleet. Ships that tried to escape found themselves surrounded by human vessels that seemed to appear from nowhere. Weapons that had never failed before suddenly couldn't hit their targets. Communication systems went dead as human jamming technology blocked all attempts to coordinate a defense. On the Kaldorian homeworld of Drakmor, War Chief Drex was experiencing his own nightmare. The human tourists and traders who had visited his world over the past few years were revealing their true identities. They were intelligence operatives who had spent months mapping every important location on the planet. When the fighting began, critical infrastructure failed simultaneously across Drakmor. Power stations shut down in perfectly coordinated strikes. Communication towers stopped working. Transportation systems ground to a halt. Even the planetary defense grid went offline as human saboteurs activated computer viruses they had planted months earlier. Drex stood in his war room, surrounded by dead communication equipment and blank display screens. His aide Grok burst through the door, his young face pale with fear. "My lord, our orbital defense platforms are not responding to commands. Ground-based weapon systems are offline. We cannot even contact our fleet elements in other star systems." Outside the window, Drex could see the lights of his capital city flickering as the power grid failed in section after section. In the distance, explosions marked the locations where his military bases were being destroyed by attackers he could not see or track. But the most terrifying thing was the silence. For the first time in his life, War Chief Drex could not communicate with his warriors. The communication networks that connected every Kaldorian military unit had been completely severed. Meanwhile, on the Thraxian hive worlds, an even stranger form of warfare was taking place. Dr. Ellen Brooks, a human xenobiologist who had spent 3 years studying Thraxian society, activated devices she had secretly placed throughout their major population centers. The devices released carefully designed biological agents that targeted the Thraxian nervous system. But instead of killing or injuring the insect-like beings, the agents disrupted their ability to share thoughts and feelings with the collective hive mind. For the first time in their species' history, individual Thraxians found themselves cut off from their brothers and sisters. The constant background noise of shared consciousness suddenly went silent, leaving millions of confused insects trying to function as independent beings. Queen Zack, deep in her breeding chamber, felt the connection to her children growing weaker by the minute. The reports from her analyzers became confused and contradictory as the hive mind network began to fall apart. "What is happening to us?" she clicked desperately. But for the first time in her life, no answer came back from the collective consciousness of her species. Within 72 hours of Jake Morrison's declaration, every major council fleet had either surrendered or been destroyed. The war that was supposed to demonstrate human weakness had instead revealed the complete superiority of human military technology and tactics. 1 year later, the same council chambers that had witnessed humanity's supposed humiliation now hosted a very different kind of gathering. The curved rows of seats were filled with representatives from dozens of species, but the atmosphere was completely transformed from that day when Jake Morrison had delivered his shocking declaration. President Kate Sullivan walked through the massive doors wearing a simple blue dress that looked almost plain compared to the elaborate robes and armor that alien leaders typically wore to important meetings. Behind her came a small group of human advisors and military officers, including Admiral Ben Carter and General Marcus Stone. The aliens who had once threatened to destroy humanity now sat quietly in their assigned seats. Many wore simple clothing instead of their traditional ceremonial garments. The change was not just in their appearance but in their entire behavior. Gone were the arrogant postures and threatening gestures that had characterized council meetings for centuries. Admiral Lisa Kane sat in the section reserved for former council military officers. The proud Kaldorian warrior who had once commanded 300 warships now wore the plain gray uniform of a war crimes defendant. Her ritual scars, once symbols of conquest and glory, now seemed like shameful reminders of the suffering she had caused. Beside her sat other former council leaders who were awaiting trial for their actions against conquered species. War Chief Drex had lost so much weight during his imprisonment that his massive frame looked almost frail. Queen Zack of the Thraxians sat motionless, still struggling to function as an individual after months of separation from her hive mind. But not all the aliens in the chamber were prisoners. Many species had adapted quickly to the new order that humans had established. The peaceful Mineralians, who had been forced to mine resources for the council against their will, now served as eager participants in the new government. Their crystalline cities were flourishing, as they were finally allowed to pursue art and philosophy, instead of forced labor. President Sullivan took her place at the central podium where council leader Vextar had once delivered ultimatums to helpless species. The reptilian being himself was notably absent, having been sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against 12 different civilizations. "Friends and colleagues," Kate began, her voice carrying easily throughout the chamber, thanks to the same sound system that had once amplified threats and demands. "Today marks the first anniversary of the end of the old Galactic Council and the beginning of our new alliance." She gestured toward the various alien representatives. "In the past year, we have accomplished things that many believed were impossible. We have ended slavery on 47 worlds. We have stopped 3 ongoing wars between member species. We have established medical care and education programs that have reached over 2 billion sentient beings." Jake Morrison, now serving as Earth's permanent representative to the new government, sat in the front row and smiled as he listened to the president's speech. He remembered the fear and uncertainty that had filled this same chamber 12 months earlier, when he had revealed the true extent of human military power. That fear had been necessary at the time. The council species had spent centuries believing that might made right, that the strong had the natural right to dominate the weak. They had needed to experience complete defeat before they could understand that there was a better way for civilizations to interact. But what had happened after the military victory was even more important than the fighting itself. Instead of ruling through fear like the old council, Humans had immediately begun sharing their technology and knowledge with former enemies. Dr. Ellen Brooks, the xenobiologist who had developed the weapons used against the Thraxians, now worked closely with Queen Zak to help individual Thraxians learn to function outside the hive mind. Many of the insect-like beings had discovered that they enjoyed thinking for themselves, creating art and music that was impossible when they were part of the collective consciousness. General Marcus Stone oversaw the occupation of former Council space, but it was unlike any conquest in galactic history. Human forces didn't loot or enslave the populations they controlled. Instead, they began implementing what they called rehabilitation programs. On Drakmor, War Chief Drex's former hunting preserves had been converted into schools where young Kaldorians learned about concepts their culture had never embraced: cooperation, individual rights, and peaceful conflict resolution. Many of the warrior species found these ideas strange at first, but some began to understand that there was strength in building rather than destroying. The Zephyrite crystal cities had become centers of scientific research where human and alien scientists worked together on projects that benefited all species. Queen Shimara had initially resisted the changes, but even she had to admit that the new cooperation was producing discoveries that would have been impossible under the old system. President Sullivan continued her speech, describing the challenges that lay ahead. We still have much work to do. There are species in distant parts of the galaxy who have not yet heard about the changes here. There are problems that will take generations to solve, but we have proven that different civilizations can work together as equals. She paused and looked directly at the section where former council leaders sat awaiting their trials. We have also proven that those who abuse their power will be held accountable for their actions, regardless of their species or position. Some of the defendants shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The human justice system was unlike anything they had experienced before. Instead of simply executing war criminals or enslaving conquered populations, humans insisted on fair trials where even their enemies could present evidence and arguments. In their own defense, Admiral Lisa Kane had spent months preparing her defense with the help of human lawyers who were working to ensure that even accused war criminals received proper legal representation. It was a concept that confused many aliens, who could not understand why humans would help their enemies in this way. The answer lay in the fundamental difference between human civilization and the old council system. Humans believed that justice required fairness for everyone, even people they disagreed with or disliked. They understood that a legal system that only protected some beings would eventually fail to protect anyone. As President Sullivan concluded her speech, representatives from dozens of species stood and applauded. The sound filled the chamber, but it was completely different from the threatening roars and clicks that had once echoed through the same space. Jake Morrison stood with the others, but his thoughts were focused on the future, rather than the past. Earth was no longer an isolated world facing destruction from hostile aliens. Instead, it had become the center of a galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. Human ships now traveled freely throughout the galaxy, but they carried teachers and doctors instead of soldiers. Human technology was shared openly with any species that wanted to learn. Human ideas about individual rights and democratic government were spreading to worlds that had never imagined such concepts were possible. The transformation was far from complete. There were still species that resisted the changes, still leaders who preferred the old system where the strong ruled the weak. But the foundation had been laid for something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization where different species could coexist as equals. As the ceremony ended and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Jake reflected on the events that had brought them to this moment. Humanity's most ruthless response to the Council's threats had not been their military victory, but their absolute refusal to rule through fear and violence. By showing the galaxy that there was a better way for civilizations to interact, humans had achieved something more permanent and valuable than any conquest. They had proven that the future belonged not to the strongest or most aggressive species, but to those who understood that true strength came from building bridges rather than walls between the stars.